Hey, I want to talk to you all about why I disagree with John Piper on Romans 3 1 through 8. I think this is important because it leads to other problems in Romans if we take this kind of stance. I do believe John Piper is a gifted teacher, and I think his doctrine is fine when he preaches on this passage, but I do think it is a misreading of the text. So this is part one, and let's just talk first about how Piper sets up Romans 3 1 through 8. And I'll just quote him here from his sermon. I'm using the text that's on his webpage. Paul has just argued in Romans 2:25 that if a Jewish person does not follow the law of God, then his circumcision has become uncircumcision. That is, he is no different from a Gentile. Now that I think is true, and I also think it is incomplete. There's other stuff going on in Romans 2, which I think is very important to also tie in here, and especially 17 through 24. That's where Paul writes, "But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, then you who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that no one must commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law, for as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." Now, you look at that, and the text does tell us about widespread unbelief and hypocrisy in Israel. One or the other or both. However, the text also tells us something else that we should not miss, and I think is essential. The text tells us of a failure of the nation of Israel to fulfill their mission. Now, what is that mission? Well, I'll get to that, but let's just look at the text here. Notice the first thing he says, if we look at Romans 2, 17 through 24, he says that he asks if you call yourself a Jew. Now, that seems to me to line right up with then what advantage has the Jew. Alright, he's talking about that name. Now, of course, he kept talking about that name throughout Romans 2, including the passage that Dr. Piper quoted from, but I just want to say this has to be included in the mix of what we think Romans 3 is trying to address, Romans 3, 1 through 8. And then, looking again at this text, we notice some other things. We notice that it talks about relying on the law or boasting in God. You are instructed from the law. In the law you have the embodiment of knowledge of truth. It talks about those who boast in the law. Well, Paul goes on to address those kinds of issues when he talks about, as he says in Romans 3:2, to begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. That's this law we're talking about. Now, what's interesting about that is Paul himself will later confess that he boasts. The ESV tries to kind of underplay this a bit, but if you look at this, Paul writes later in Romans 15, 17 through 18, he says, "In Christ Jesus then I have reason to be proud of my work for God, for I will not venture to speak of anything except what Christ has accomplished through me to bring the Gentiles to obedience by word and deed." So the passage we just read in Romans 2 talks about God's name being blasphemed among the Gentiles. But here Paul says he's proud of his work because Christ has accomplished through him the obedience of faith among the Gentiles. In fact, it's not just be proud of my work. The actual translation is, or the word is the same as what's used in Romans 2. "In Christ Jesus, then, I have reason to boast in my work for God, for I will not venture to speak of anything except what Christ has accomplished through me to bring the Gentiles to obedience by word and deed." Alright, so as you can see there at the bottom in the italics, the name of God is being blasphemed as a result of what the Jews are doing, and they're boasting in the law to be teachers. We'll see that in a minute. But Paul's boasting because the Gentiles are being converted. Now, this brings me to the other part. What are the Jews saying that they're doing? They're a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor to the foolish, a teacher of children. You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach, do you steal? Alright, you who say. Now, who are they saying this to? These children, these foolish. Again, the last verse is, "The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." So it's these Gentiles are claiming to be able to teach, to be a light to be instructors. So, again, Romans 3:2 says, to begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. But the question here is, entrusted to do what? I don't think the issues here are simply to get saved or to trust in Jesus for salvation. They were entrusted with a purpose. They were supposed to be a guide, a light, an instructor, a teacher, perhaps even a father to the nations, as we'll talk about in some other videos about Abraham. So this brings us to what I call Israel's mission. Deuteronomy 4, 5, and 6. See, I have taught you statutes and rules as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this nation is a wise and understanding people. All right? They will be converted. They will be impressed. They will learn about the true God. Notice how this works. You could just as easily have Moses say, see, I have entrusted you with the oracles of God, that you should do them in the land that you're entering, etc. So again, the Israelites seem to get this. They think that they're doing this. They're a guide to the blind. They're an instructor. They're called to be a teacher of children. All right? But it's not working out. The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. I think we've talked about this long enough for one video, so I will be continuing this in the next one. Stay tuned. Thanks for your attention. God bless.